Hello, in this video, we are going to compare iterators and generators in JavaScript. By the end of this video, you should understand these two concepts in JavaScript. Let's begin now. Welcome back. In this video, we are going to outline the differences between iterators and generators. Let's begin with a quick outlook what an iterator is. I'll begin with just some few comments to help you understand iterators. So these are simply objects. These are objects or patterns, and they are useful when you are trying to loop or to iterate a collection of data. They define some kind of sequence, and also they implement something we call iterator protocol, which I'm going to shortly explain. This iterator protocol does two things. One, it returns an object, as you're going to see in the example later, and this object has a value and next properties. Then something else about it, you can check if an object or data set is iterable by checking the prototype. You'll know if that object is iterable. What you look for in the prototype is the symbol method. Then this symbol will of course have symbol dot iterator. Then for us to understand how these iterators work, we need to break down the process into post steps. The first step, step one, defining the data set or the object, so that we have something to work with. So we define this object here. Then we can use an array is equal to 3 elements and see. The second step, so this I'll call step 2, is to check. We are presuming we just have this data, but you'd like to check is this its prototype to see if this data set is iterable. So we do this by creating a constant array, then you just call it proto for prototype, which will be equal to get the prototype of an object, you first of all get hold of the object, then you use the method get prototype of, then you pass the object that we are trying to get its prototype. Then we can log this on the console to see if it has that method that we are looking for. So we save that, it's an array, and you can see all its methods, all the methods. Then down here we have this method symbol, then symbol.iterator. So that's how you find if that object is iterable. Then now we move to the next step. Step 3 is going to, now I would call it define or set the sequence or the iterator. Here we use the symbol data type. There's a data type. You can check out my other video on JavaScript data types. You will see symbol has been explained there. We use the symbol data type, which is usually a representation of a key, and it has some value. We use the symbol data type to define an iterable function, const our iterator. This will be equal to, then we take the array, which is our object here. Then in here we do symbol dot iterator. Then we, outside this bracket here, we complete with the normal bracket. What we've simply done here, we've set out now this iterator. I would like to now move to the step 4, which I'll just call it looping through, to just see what this contains. To loop through, I'm going to be accessing the next I'm going to be using the next method to access the values of this particular iterator. What I'll simply do is console.log. Then I would like to log this as JSON. So I can do JSON.stringify. We convert this to a JSON string. Then I pass in iterator. Then I use the next method to access the properties of this object. We have already done now the first. So this one, I would call it first loop. Then I would like to look at our object here. So that's the first loop. We can go to the second one. the third one, then the fourth one. The reason we want to get to the fourth one, we want to find out what happens once we get to the end of it. Once we get to the end of it, we expect this done to be true because this loop is not yet done. We begin with the first, then we move to the second. There is nothing else to change so much other than this text here. So this is the second one. We are looping through the same thing. So the second one, we get the value which is b, and still the done is false. Then we move to the third and the fourth. I'll move to the third and the fourth at the same time. So I'll get rid of this. Then this, I'll call it the fourth. Then this, I'll call it the third. Then I'll add an I here. Then I'll add a V here to depict the Roman index 4. We are looping through the first time, the second time, the third, the fourth. I would like to first get rid of this. Then we save. So we are still at false. Done is still false. Then we add the fourth loop and it's true. And we have no value in the last loop. We have no value, but the loop is done. That's the most basic way of explaining what an iterator is. So you need to remember, use it to iterate over a data set. Then you define the sequence. Then it uses a certain protocol. It returns an object, and this object has a value and done properties. Like you can see, it's an object that has been returned, and it has this the value of whatever we're iterating through, then the done. Then you can check if this something is iterable. That one you should not forget because it's useful in other places other than these iterators and generators. Using this method, like you get the object, then get prototype of, then you pass in the object, then you're going to find. And you can not only find whether this object is you can find so many other things about this object, like you saw once I did a console log. You can open up and find if it's an array. You see it gives you all the methods of this array and everything about that particular object. If this was a different kind of object, suppose we turned it into an object. So this we can call it first, then we call this second, then we call this third, then we save, then we have an object here. Forget about this for a while. We can just comment out this, then save. So here we have an object. So we can still use this particular method to find out this object and look up at its methods and all the properties of that particular object. So this is a very important method of understanding what prototypes are and learning to work with object prototypes. There's another video I've done about prototypes you can check out in this channel. Now let's move to generators. Generators are functions that can pause their executions and resume. That kind of pattern of pausing an execution and then resuming allows you to generate a sequence. So the best way to explain it is to write such a function. When you're writing a generator function, you use the asterisk and the yield keyword, yield, because they yield something you are trying to generate. So simply, we can create a generator function using the keyword function. Then we put an asterisk at the end of the function. Then we name it. A typical example of how we would use generator function, I think of maybe we have a database and we'd like to have user IDs. User ID, we can generate the user ID automatically. So we call it generate user IDs. That's the name of our function. Then this function, it's just a normal function, but it's going to take in two parameters. For us to generate, we need to have a starting number and an ending number. So we call start ID. We just call it start ID, then end ID. So that's the starting number and the ending number. Then to generate numbers, we can use a for loop. A for, then we say let the first condition is going to be let user ID be equal to this start ID. So that's the first condition. Then the second is to now compare user ID. User ID, whenever user ID is less than or equal to the end ID, we incriminate. So that's the second condition. Then what we should simply do here is user ID increases by 1. That's our for loop condition. Then we need to close this because now, so in here we can now use the keyword yield Then this yield return user ID. So that's simply a generator function. Then we can move on and now use it by giving it a start ID, which we can say maybe 101. Then you give it an end ID, you do 201. Then we now create the generator. User ID generator will be equal to, we now call this function and pass in the IDs. This ID, the start, we can try to make them different. So let's just call this user ID, then you call this user ID, and ID. So we can pass in this and this. So we now have the generator that's going to run this function and generate those IDs. So once we have the IDs, we now need to loop through all of these IDs using another for off loop. You can check out my other video on the 6 JavaScript loops to understand how these loops work. So for user ID off, then we pick this, we are looping through these IDs that are of user ID generator. Then in here we can now do a console.log. Then we log in. Here we are going to log in the user ID. So you can add a text before the console log to just show us these are IDs. So you can say user ID, and then we now pass the user ID. We pass this and close that. What we are simply doing here, we are creating a generator function, and a generator function is a function that pauses and resumes execution, allowing you to create a specific sequence. And now in our function here, we are giving this function two parameters, the start ID and the end ID. Then we are using inside here a loop, a for loop, which sets the ID, the start of the loop to the start ID that we feed to. In this case, this will be the start ID that we feed to this function. Then we are comparing the user ID to the end ID to the last ID that we've passed, which is this number. Then as long as that condition that the user ID is less than this, keep incrementing it, then yield us the user ID. Then now here we create a generator which is equivalent to this function, a generator variable or constant. Then we loop through it using a for of loop generating these IDs. So I'd like to save this and see what happens. And you can see on the console, we have all these IDs we have generated from 101 all the way down to the last one. Basically, that's what generators are. So the take from this video is iterators are objects or patterns that run with a certain sequence, while generators are functions that pause and resume the execution, allowing you to create sequence. But you define something that you should not forget about generators. You define them using the function keyword, then you put an asterisk, then you use the yield keyword to get a return. That's it for this video. If you watched up to this point and you found value in this video, kindly consider giving this video a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. Thank you. I hope by the end of this video, you understand the concept of iterators and generators in JavaScript. If you found value in this video, kindly consider giving it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. Thank you.